Diane, how do you say your last name?
Tanjuaquio.
Oh, God. Tanjuaquio. Cheers.
Cheers.
Alright. First off, just thank you for having me over. Like I tell those people every time I meet up with someone who hasn't, who I've never really met or talked to in person, it's always weird to receive a random message from me about, hey, can you want to hang out for an hour or two and talk about nothing? So I always appreciate it, when people do invite me over, just to have me in. But I wanted to talk to you because you are, I don't know how deep into the flag football scene. I mean, you're working with TUFF. I know you've been working with them for a while. I see you playing everywhere. So, dude, my biggest question, when I talk to chicks on the American side, is about football. Is how did you initially get started? Even playing your interest?
Yeah, it was totally random for me. I didn't grow up playing sports. And so the only sport I ever played growing up was one season of badminton that I played in high school. And I only did it to put it on my college resume. And I wasn't even good at badminton. It was just, let me just put this on my resume.
Why badminton? Was it just...
I went to a very Asian high school, and it was the easiest team to get on. Okay. And so I was not athletic at all growing up. I, ran long distance running in college. But maybe 8 years ago, someone on Facebook was like, we need girls for flag football. Never even thought about football before, but I was like, there are probably dudes here.
There you go.
And so initially I joined flag football because I thought I would meet dudes.
Yeah. How'd that work out for you?
Well, now all of my friends tell me to stop messing around with the football dudes. So it's been an 8-year-long experiment, which I think most of my friends would say has failed.
Okay, fair enough.
But I was terrible for the longest time. So I was lucky to start out with some teams who just needed bodies, and so they had the time and the patience to let me be bad.
And before this, you had no interest in football at all?
No,
nothing.
Not at all. And so I was bad. It took me 2 years to even learn how to catch a ball consistently. But then I started to fall in love with sort of the strategic part of it.
Yeah.
And so, the thought of, what coverage, what matchups do you need, game time situational stuff. That is the stuff that really got me going.
Are you just a thinker in general?
Yeah, and so that's why I fell in love with football, is just sort of this game where you're trying to outthink the other team, and so that's what made me commit to it, and that's how I fell in love with it.
And how long ago did you start playing?
So 8 years ago.
8 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And so and then I started playing in a league that offered football 7 days a week.
Oh, awesome.
And so for a while I was playing 6 or 7 days a week.
Gosh.
And so I accumulated so much game experience. Yeah. So in terms of seasons, I've probably played 70 seasons by now.
It's crazy how that works out, because I think everybody who's really been engulfed in the flag football subculture community, they've had their time where they played 5 days, 6 days, 7 days a week, and it just wears on you, man. How are you right now? How much are you playing right now, or how involved are you?
So I'm playing twice a week. I think that's sort of my sweet spot.
Yeah.
When I was playing more often, there were some periods where I was playing twice a day. So 2 leagues in a day.
Yeah.
And like you said, it wears on your body. I'm getting a little older. I'm 33 now, and
young blood.
and everyone always makes fun of me because I'm always injured, because I'm always sort of risking it for the brisket. I'm laying out all that stuff, and I realized that I had to cut down, or my body was just going to give out on me. Yesterday I played a game and I almost got concussed because this girl and I just slammed our heads together. And I've had enough concussions where I always said the next one that I got, I would retire.
Really?
So, yeah.
And this is all just football?
Yeah, all football.
Damn.
So,
you're a savage then. That's what it sounds like.
So I'm playing twice a week now. We keep waiting for TUFF to come back, but we never have enough teams. And
Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think it's sad, because I feel like women always keep wishing for opportunities and asking for opportunities, but when they come up, that's a frustration I have with, sort of women's football, is they just don't take advantage of the opportunities that are already hard to get. And so we've tried twice now to get a season going, and we just couldn't get enough teams. part of me thinks that these girls, didn't want to get stomped on by the sirens anymore. But so I think it's partially our fault.
That's how it is. Even the guys. I mean, it's hard to keep teams around when they keep getting beat up by the same teams. I mean, it's just not fun for them to spend their money on hey, we're never gonna win anything. So I mean, I guess that depends on the attitude of the individual.
Yeah.
It's I mean, you got to take your L's, you got to take your losses. But but that was a great point that you made, because that's why I brought up that initial question. You get there are very few opportunities, as far as I know, for women trying to play football, in the area, especially down here in Southern California. But in Mexico, on the other hand, I have the exposure to that, so it's just everywhere.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's a completely different world.
Well, I remember some players from Mexico came up and played in TUFF for a while. Sylvia Contreras, was it? I remember Sylvia. I think there were a couple of players that came up.
I don't know if any other girls came up, but I know Sylvia came up. She played with Swarm. Mayhem, I don't know.
Swarm at the time. But I just loved the energy that she brought in, because she's out here dipping. She's bringing in new stuff that we haven't seen before, and it's always good for us to get exposed to that, because we're kind of an insular flag football community, and so we all know who the girls are who play in our area, and we get sort of set in knowing who does what. So I just love sort of that injection of new blood, and I would love to see more opportunities to get that intermingling going more often.
I give Sylvia props for that, dude. She, I remember a while back when she was playing for a while already, but she had asked me what's some of the best strategies to just get better as a player. And I mean, I told her it's you just play as much as possible. The more you play, then I mean, like anything else, you're gonna get better. Inevitably, you're gonna get better. Like you said, it took you a couple years to learn how to catch.
Yeah.
Now you're killing it.
Well, reps is one thing, and TUFF was actually a game changer for me because of the film.
Yeah.
And so I am constantly watching film. I'm watching the guys' film because I want to see what I can learn from them. And so even just earlier today, I was watching some clips from AFFL this morning, and they had a little clip about Church's Money and Dream Team, and I was just kind of zooming in and kind of watching the way that they move their hips, because that's what I'm working on right now is, sort of my evade movements, just sort of how to be efficient about your hip movement.
Yeah.
I noticed that Darius Walters, for example, he does a lot of sort of the karaoke move, and I've been working on that. So TUFF, I really feel gave you so much material to study from, and sort of an opportunity to learn from the best guys, because I'm certainly not going to play at that level, but I can pick up certain things from them. Yeah.
You take and you assimilate to your game any way you can.
Mm-hmm.
And how's it been with TUFF in general? I know you've worked with them. How'd you even get into that initially? I guess on the work inside of it, or the podcast and all that.
It's funny because people call me the mayor of flag football in LA. Because my personality is naturally just to know people. I want to know everything about everyone, and I'm constantly out there on the field. I have my people that I support, Caker and the Swordfish, certain people that I know from the co-ed world. So I was constantly out there, and I was a face that people knew. Okay. And then Stephen and Danny would always hit me up for quotes and information for the podcast. And so I think I was just a familiar face that people, kind of got used to seeing. And so when Danny quit the podcast, I think someone told me that someone was hint, hint, nudge, nudge, Billy is looking for a woman to join the podcast.
That was perfect.
And to me, it was, it was clearly a very pointed, suggestion that you should think about doing the podcast. And to me, that was just perfect, because I like to talk about football. I could talk about it all day. Yeah. And so it was just you're going to pay me to talk about football?
Done.
But it was a little frustrating because, it's a blessing and a curse how big TUFF has become, how much it's expanding.
Yeah, man, it's crazy.
And so I think that the podcast model was feasible when it was just LA. Mm-hmm. But once it started expanding to San Diego, to Vegas, to Phoenix, it just became kind of this monster that where everyone expected you to be able to watch their film. And so I would have guys in like the Warrior division saying, you know, you didn't talk about Warrior division at all, or you didn't talk about this film. And I was like, I'm sorry, I only have so much time in the day. I gotta prioritize what I watch. I gotta watch New York film, you know, and people are starting to expect things that we couldn't deliver on because I have a job.
Yeah, no, you have a life, yeah, absolutely.
So I was, you know, for a while I was watching film starting at 8 a.m. Anytime I got a break from work, I was trying to watch film.
Really?
Like, I would stay up and watch film, and I was just like, I can't do it.
Damn. So you guys had to cover every single region? Oh, damn.
Yeah, so we were doing...
And you're doing that like in an hour? Half hour?
So we were doing 4 podcasts a week.
Oh, okay.
So a show for every conference, and it just became unmanageable, and so I think Steven just got burnt out.
Yeah.
I was still into it, but I was doing so much work to prep for it, and it's hard to sort of get that feedback from people in terms of how you're doing or why you're doing it, because ultimately you're generally hearing from people who don't like you.
That's true.
And so it's hard to stay motivated to do something like that. Billy warned us that you would only hear from people who didn't think you were doing a good job. Yeah. But ultimately the people who would talk shit are still listening to the show. And that was something that I needed to remember. But, you know, when Steven decided that he was done, I think Billy saw it as an opportunity to sort of retool and figure out how we best serve, you know, the, you know, TUFF Nation. Yeah. And so all of the cities, while recognizing that we can't do what people have grown accustomed to doing, which is still way more than any other league is doing right now.
More.
Yeah.
That's what I tell everyone. I mean, like you said, like there's always gonna be people who are gonna complain about any given product or service or anything you're doing. Period. Yeah. But at the end of the day, like TUFF is just doing much more than anyone else. So it's like you can complain all day about the videos, about the highlights, about the pictures, about whatever it is. But I mean, it's just so much more better product. Yeah. There's nothing to say against it. How are you guys doing the podcast? I'm just like out of curiosity. Like, were you driving down to?
Yeah,
Anaheim?
So I would drive down to Anaheim, which would take me 2 hours. Yeah. It would take me 2 hours to drive down to Anaheim,
and I know that little studio set. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, and you know, we would get the film if we were lucky Monday morning. Yeah. Right, and so that gives me less than 24 hours to prep.
It's ridiculous.
And so, you know, I'm kind of drawing out what I want to talk about, who I want to talk about, who I thought gave particularly good performances. You know, if I notice something like a team playing a new defense, these are all notes that I'm trying to take in less than 24 hours. Yeah. And I would drive down, and we would, you know, Steve and I would brainstorm. Yeah. You know, for about 20 minutes, you know, what we want to hit, who we want to interview, all of that stuff. But generally, I was taking the lead on what we wanted to talk about. And it was a lot of freestyling, honestly, because I knew so much about the players and the teams and what was going on that it was just easier for Steve to just sort of facilitate topics that I would talk about.
No, definitely, because you're out there in the street. That's the same thing. Like when I talked to him, I mean, it was just easier for me to talk about things because I was out there, I was playing, or God knows what. Like you're in the trenches. Whereas Steve, I mean, I don't think he was out there that much, or I don't know. I think him and Danny told me that Billy actually told him like he didn't really want them out in the fields too much because they're like a media face of it. Or I don't know, this kind of separation.
There's this idea that, you know, you want your personalities to be sort of separated or like, you know, held in isolation so that people kind of see you as a media figure or, you know, that type of thing. But for me, it was different because my strength came from the fact that people saw me out there and they knew that I knew what I was talking about because I was watching it firsthand. Yeah. And so we talked about that a bit. And I asked Billy, do you want me to stay away from the fields? And he's like, no, people
cool.
know you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's part of the appeal, is that people know that you know what you're talking about because you're there.
Yeah.
And so it is a balance to strike. But I always, I just want to play to my strengths, and my strength has been knowing people. So
smart. I mean, it sounds like you're very self-aware in general. Just like, and I'm saying that, like, most of these I don't need to like talk about football too much. So I kind of want to get into that, see a few things about your personal life. Like, did you grow up in LA? What's your family look like?
Yeah, so I was born in Honolulu, and so my dad.
Military?
Yeah, so my dad was in the Navy. He was actually in the Philippines, and this is back when the Philippines and the U.S. had a more kind of colonial relationship.
Yeah.
And so my dad joined the Navy when he was living in the Philippines because they were offering citizenship.
Done.
Yeah. And so my sister and I were both born in Hawaii. My mom and my 2 older brothers moved from the Philippines to Hawaii. And I spent my early childhood there. And then we moved to the Bay Area. So I was living in Oakland for part of my childhood too. And then we moved, further east in California. But I've always lived in the West Coast. So I've always lived in Hawaii or California. My family, most of my family still lives up in the Bay. But my sister and I both live down here. But, I've been in LA since 2004. So I went to UCLA.
Okay.
I got my master's degree at UCLA.
What'd you study?
I got my master's in education.
Okay.
So I work at UCLA now too. So I'm a triple Bruin.
A triple Bruin?
Yeah, so I've been at UCLA for 15 years. And so as both a student and a staff member, and I can't imagine leaving, honestly. And people keep asking me, don't you want to experience something else? And I'm like, why? Why? I'm happy here. I have my dream job of sorts. So I work as the assistant dean of students at UCLA, and I work in conduct. And so no one ever grows up saying, I want to work in discipline. But I really found it, an amazing opportunity to really make a difference in students' lives, because a lot of the times people are engaging in violations of the code, of our student conduct code, because there are other things going on in their life and they're struggling. Whether it's academic pressures that they're feeling, real or imagined, from family, or, expectations that they feel like people have on them, or, so my specialty is dealing with students who are experiencing the apex of stress. And so...
Gosh, that sounds terrifying.
Yeah, so these situations where you have taken on a course load that's too much for you, and then your father passes away, or, something's happening with your financial situation, and you don't have the tools at that point in your life to understand how to be resilient, how to adapt to that. And so that's what we're here to teach you. And so I found my job where, I'm talking to students who are cheated on exams, and I'm saying, what's going on with you? We can talk about this violation later, but I want to know what's going on with you and how you got to this place where you're making this type of decision. Because you can make bad decisions that are not consistent with what you see your character to be. And so how do we get you to a place where you're making decisions that are consistent with your character? And that's always been my approach to my work, is you are a good person. Sometimes you make decisions that run contrary to who you believe you are. And so how do we get you to a place where you're asking for help, you're adapting, you are, developing the type of skills you need to make good decisions when you are experiencing the biggest stresses of your life. And so it's, I probably had more students cry in my meetings than anyone else, because, I'm honestly just like, I'm an advocate for you.
Yeah.
I understand that you cheated on this exam or you got in a fight, but I want to be there for you. I want you to know that I'm investing in you.
Yeah, that sounds like amazing. It seems like there's so much pressure in that position. I mean, like you said, you're coming across these people like when they're in a bad spot.
They're not happy to see you.
They're coming to your office. They're in a bad spot.
Yeah.
Is that overwhelming for you? Like, as far as like...
Oh, for sure. Because you're not going to reach out. I mean, you're not going to get through to everyone. And it's also very high stakes. And so you have people who have their attorneys. You have people who have parents that don't really understand the situations that their students are in because they're living away from home for the first time. And they don't understand the developmental process that we're trying to get them to go through. And so I think the high stakes and being in the dean's office where, you know, everyone's sort of looking to you to lead the way, I think that gets stressful for sure. But, you know, we have always been a place where we always say, if you need a mental health day, you take it. Yeah. Because we don't want to experience burnout. I think a lot of people who work in conduct get burned out. Really? And so if you're looking for a long career in that, you have to take those steps to be like checking in with yourself. How am I feeling? Especially because I am naturally a very anxious person.
Okay.
I deal with anxiety, and so, you know, I have to get to a place where I'm asking for help when I start feeling myself getting anxious, you know, kind of getting panicked, because that's what I tell my students that they have to do.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I have to remember what I am telling my students to do for myself. Mm-hmm. But, you know, it's definitely a thing where, you know, people who work in my realm, they leave after a couple years because it's really hard work.
Why is it? Is it because you're taking on like the stress of the situation you're facing, or like why is it that like the burnout or like the turnover is like so high?
Because you're constantly giving people bad news.
Okay, yeah.
You are, you know, there's a lot of pressure to meet certain deadlines or, you know, to meet timelines, but you're also juggling a lot at the same time. So, you know, I could be working on 50 different cases at the same time, and you are just, you know, you're making sure that you're making progress on every single one. And it looks bad if you know, something slips through the cracks.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's easy for something to slip through the cracks when you are dealing with 50 different students at the same time. And so I think that my work environment is a lot better than it is in a lot of different universities. Okay. But at the same time, we still have to check in with ourselves, check in with our supervisors, just to make sure that we are not overextending ourselves. Okay. Because we can't do the work that we're supposed to do if we are feeling overwhelmed or anxious or, you know, all of that.
Do you feel like you're pretty good about that as far as being like aware of like when you have reached to like a burning out point or like a tiring point, or where like, hey, I need a day, I need this stuff? Yeah.
So having dealt with anxiety for, you know, pretty much most of my life, I've come to know to sense when, you know, things are getting out of control. And so, for example, when I start getting anxious, I shake a lot, so I tremble. Really? I get sort of, you know, I have gotten panic attacks in the past, and so when I feel like I'm just sort of like rolling towards that point, that's when I know I have to be like, I need to take a day off, or I need to go to therapy, and so, you know, all of these things that we tell students that they have to do. Yeah. I think that it's good for me to know firsthand what a lot of these students are going through, and for them to see, you know, sort of those adaptive strategies that I've learned in order to be resilient. And so to me, I want all of our students to be resilient and to build resiliency skills. And so I have to understand for myself what that looks like.
I'm loving this. I'm loving the whole the anxiety talk. Do you mind if I like dig more into that?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
No, not at all.
Like at what point in life? I don't know how young you were. How old were you when you were like, okay, like I'm like a naturally anxious person. Like a lot of things like just eat me. Or like I don't know.
So, for me, I realized it when you know. So when I start getting anxious and kind of getting in a bad place, insomnia happens. And so the first time in my life that I experienced bad insomnia was, you know, right after I graduated from college. And I went through several months, so I would say 3 to 4 months, where I wasn't sleeping more than an hour or two.
Literally?
Yeah.
God.
So literally an hour or two, and I didn't understand why. And so when you have insomnia, you sort of naturally think, well, my body's exhausted, so eventually I'm going to fall asleep again. And it just wasn't happening. And so when I would go to the doctor, they would say, oh, here's some Ambien, all of that, but it wasn't addressing the root cause. And so when I realized that the root cause was anxiety, I think it just sort of clicked one day where, someone mentioned to me, I don't even remember who it was, she's like, you sound like you are anxious. And so at that point, that's when I said, let's go to therapy and talk about it. And I ended up spending probably 6 months going to therapy twice a week and really just working through a lot of these issues where I didn't realize sort of these deep-seated issues where, about how I grew up and my relationship with my parents and how I felt about dating and, things that triggered my anxiety. And so I did a lot of hard work to understand why I was feeling that way, and I'd never done that before. And so since then, I've become more aware. And so when when it starts affecting my sleep, that's when I know.
Immediately.
That's when I know that that my anxiety is starting to, kind of bubble up again. And so typically, if I'm not sleeping for a couple nights in a row, that's when I know I need to start, doing an inventory of how am I feeling about work, how am I feeling about my relationships with others, sort of checking in with what are things that are stressing me out, and is there really a reason to stress out about it? Yeah. And so I do a lot of that sort of mental inventory with myself, and usually I know when I'm not sleeping.
Yeah.
So every once in a while, my body just won't fall asleep. And I won't fall asleep until
you just lay there in bed, or you hop on the computer, or hop on your phone, or...
So I learned a lot about sleep hygiene.
Okay.
And so,
let me hear it.
Yeah, so you're not supposed to spend time in bed where you're not sleeping. And so a lot of people do that. So they chill in their beds, they're on their phones, they're doing whatever. But your body has to associate your bed with a place that you sleep. And you cannot associate your bed with a place that you hang out on your phone or that kind of thing. And so if I'm not sleeping, I will chill out here and I will wait until my eyes are like drooping. And so sometimes that's 1 in the morning, sometimes it's 3 in the morning, sometimes it's 5. But it's just something I gotta do. And so a couple of years ago, I went through about 2 months of insomnia where my body, it started having this reaction to being in my bed where when I was in bed and I started to doze off, my body would naturally just sort of jerk myself awake. And it would happen, consistently and incessantly. So I couldn't fall asleep in my bed.
We're talking like physically?
Yeah.
Or what?
So I would be in bed and my body would just jerk. As soon as I dozed off, it would just be like my arm or my leg or something like that.
We're not sleeping yet.
Yeah, and so eventually I just had to learn that I had to retrain my mind to see my bed as a place that I slept. And so that's when I started hanging out here whenever I wasn't sleeping. And so I would just be sitting on the couch, staring off, maybe listening to an audiobook, but I've learned things where if you don't sleep one night, you can't catastrophize it the next day. Yeah. And so a lot of times if you're not sleeping, you're like, I'm too tired to do anything today, and you just gotta shake out of it. You just gotta be like, I'm getting everything done that I'm supposed to get done today. It's gonna be fine. And so I actually went through this whole online program where we went through all of that. You kept a diary of when you fell asleep and all of that. But I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about not sleeping because they don't really know what to do if you're not sleeping.
Do you think it's that common of a thing? Or like a...
Oh, yeah. I actually posted on Facebook not that long ago where I was just like, this is, sometimes I get insomnia, all of this stuff. And a bunch of people messaged me privately and just like, oh my gosh, I've experienced insomnia. I never really knew what to do about it. And so, I went through this whole journey where I had to figure out what I was going to do about it. And it's the process of figuring out how to help stressed me out even more.
Whatever it is, like I have random like depressive attacks or just
Yeah.
like random moments where it's like, man, like, and the same thing, like I've grown aware of it over the past like few years to where I feel like wrapping up. I was like, I tell people like, dude, like it's gonna be bad this day, like I just can't do anything, and I still like I just don't know what it is, dude. Like
Yeah.
it's, and like you said, like the same thing with for people with anxiety. I mean, if you haven't experienced like these depressive moments, I'm sure most people have, but if you haven't experienced them, then there's no way to really relate and explain like what you're going through or why this is making you feel this way, or like why you feel so crappy. And it's tough, man. But I haven't done anything as far as therapy or anything like that. I mean, I haven't really talked to anyone about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people who don't experience it, the best thing that they can do is to validate how that person is feeling, while understanding, I don't know exactly what you're going through, but what you're feeling is valid, and I support you talking about this, or really trying to figure out how you deal with it. And so I've said this before, but I'll say it again. I want people to not be afraid to talk about what they're going through.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier where I get a lot of students who are crying during my meetings with them because they've never experienced the freedom to talk about this stuff. And I want to know everything. I want to know, why you feel like your parents expect you to perform or, in a certain manner, or to be in this major, or to, be in this career. And for you to question, are these things that you are anxious about or stressed about or depressed about, is there really a basis in reality for it? And so something that my therapist always would tell me is to ask, is this really true? Is it really true that your parents would be disappointed in you if you didn't pursue this major? Or is this something that you've kind of projected on them? And so I think if you asked your parents, if you said, I'm not happy studying biology and I want to study, something else, you've kind of created this worst case scenario in your mind that where your parents really just want you to be happy. Yeah. And so things like that, really questioning whether or not the things that you are stressing about actually exist in the way that you stress about them.
That's one of those things that seems so simple, but it's just very straightforward. But I mean, it's hard for someone to really have that conversation to bring it up. Like for you, like I admire the fact that you're able to be so open about yourself, about just your life.
Yeah.
But it's hard for other people to even bring a conversation like that with their friends, with their parents. I mean, like how do you even do that? But it's tough, man. I think like thinking of you being so like I guess anxious in general, like how. I think of it coming full circle to like the media stuff or like your work stuff, like how I feel like you would have avoided like positions with such a tense like nature to it. Like, I don't know, like you working professionally, like dealing with these high stakes scenarios, like I feel like you would have avoided that. Or no, was it something you were drawn to more? Do you think, or did you just happen to stumble across that, like working with conduct?
I think that I am okay pursuing things that I wouldn't normally be comfortable with because I believe in the core purpose of what I'm doing. And so I believe in investing in our students and making them feel like they can grow and deal with the stuff that they're going through. Or I love football to the extent where I get nervous about I would get nervous about doing the podcast. I get nervous about being on camera. I get nervous talking in front of people. But, I fall back on the fact that I'm doing what I love to do. And so I can deal with, I can persevere, through the things that I get freaked out about, talking on camera and things like that, because I believe in the core things that I'm doing.
Yeah.
But I still get nervous.
Now you're telling me I have failed classes in high school and college just because I was too nervous to give a presentation.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, that was the worst. But like I said, like over the years, like you just kind of grow and you learn how to deal with it and just do it. And now, like I would have never imagined like me doing like the random media stuff that I do. Like I would have been at this point, like looking back at me and like I said, like in middle school, high school, like I was the most nervous, anxious kid like growing up, like forever. Like I still have a hard time like carrying on like small talk with people.
Yeah.
So it's just ironic that I enjoy like doing these podcasts, like hanging out. What does your day-to-day, like, just I'm curious, like, you going into work every day, like, what does that look like? You go in your office or your area, you have to hop on, you got 2,800 emails, or, what's a normal day in your life?
Yeah, so typically I'm meeting with 3 or 4 students a day. It's hard to do more than that because you're really diving into their situation. You're really kind of taking on a lot of emotional distress.
Yeah.
And so technically we have more time to take on more meetings, but just emotionally we figured out that we can't do that. And so we're working with our students, we are contacting witnesses, so we're investigators. And we're dealing with faculty, we're dealing with staff, we're dealing with random community members who are looking to us for answers for things. But we also have to do a lot of kind of that menial administrative work.
Yeah.
So typing up meeting notes and sending follow-up emails and letters and all of that stuff. So I think that's what makes the job difficult sometimes is you have so many boxes that you have to check. And one thing that I am trying to be better at is to not be a desk luncher. And so I
know what that means.
I tend to eat lunch at my desk.
Oh, a desk luncher.
And so I have to be better about stepping outside of the office and not just continuing to work through my lunch, because that's part of the reason why people get burned out, because they're literally in their office from 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon, especially in the winter when you can come in and the sun's not out and then you leave and it's dark.
Yeah. And I imagine this is like an easy job to take home with you. Like, how do you go about avoiding that?
I can't take it home with me.
Okay.
And so I have a very robust life outside of work. I've never been the type of person who works from home because I just can't do it. Like, I will bust my ass to get things done in that time that I'm at work because I would go crazy if I thought about work. And so, after work I play football, I work out, I play bar trivia, and so...
Bar trivia, I love that.
I have family that's local, and so I try to make sure that my life outside of my life outside of work is something that I look forward to, because I need to have something to look forward to when I leave work. Otherwise, I think I would go crazy.
Yeah, definitely. How's it been working with TUFF now? Like a professional, like so you started with the podcast. That, like you said, like whatever happened with that happened. Then you guys kind of revamping for like the new. How would you describe the new kind of media you're trying to put out there? Is it just gonna be like one show, or is it gonna be like a series thing?
It's supposed to be one show. That is supposed. I coined the term "Tough Nation." Like, that's not a thing that existed until I randomly said it at a podcast. But it's supposed to, instead of the podcast, which was very conference specific or city specific, we want to do different segments, so weekly segments, in addition to things that we do sort of on a rolling basis when we feel like we have content for it. And so a lot of it is going to be driven by content that's provided to us by players, but it's a lot of things that we've been playing around with is doing an interview with somebody who we think is the beast of the week, or an idea that I have is build a beast. And so this idea of, if you're building the perfect quarterback, which parts would you take from what person? And so we keep calling it sort of the sports center of TUFF. And I think that's what our model would be.
That's what I imagine.
But I try to take inspiration from, PTI, from the herd, things like that. And it's just interesting because no one else is doing it. The real sports center, the real PTI, the herd, they have scores of staff members who are working on it, and this is literally their job. So we're trying to figure out how we do something comparable to that with...
How many is in your guys' team? Like,
yeah,
give or take?
It's the three of us hosts. So me, Eric R. Norris, Chris Scarlatta, and then Billy, and another guy, BJ Tidwell, who plays in LA, sort of working on this show together. So, we're still figuring it out. I think it's not necessarily going to make people happy if they're expecting, the podcast again, or, sort of a show version of the podcast. Yeah. It's going to be completely different from that. And so, hopefully people aren't expecting this show to be what the podcast was, because it's not.
Yeah, it's good to know. Have you ever done like any other kind of media stuff or anything at all, like before working with TUFF?
A league that I currently play in, we used to do, sort of just Google Hangouts, and so playoff previews, sort of recaps, preseason previews. A bunch of us would just sort of hop on a Google Hangout and record that.
Awesome.
Because we just felt like people get addicted to football, and so they want more content.
Yeah.
And so that was just sort of my early attempts to kind of provide that. And was
that you heading that up initially? Or?
Yeah,
okay,
and so now with TUFF, it's just taking it up to 5 more levels.
Yeah.
So back in the days when we would just hop on a Google Hangout and just talk about whatever, now we're trying to plan it all to a bigger extent and to give it a more professional feel.
Yeah, it's a whole different animal. You're working with lighting, you're working with backgrounds. Has that been like intimidating, like working like a more professional setting?
Oh yeah. And so, funny enough, I grew up with a very severe stutter. And
really?
So when I was a kid, I had a very severe speech impediment that I had to work with a speech therapist on, and so that's
you got
where
all the therapists.
I know. So that's where my fear of public speaking comes from.
That makes sense.
Is this idea where I'm not capable of, or this fear that I'm not capable of expressing what I'm thinking, and so that's something that I've been working on, my whole life.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I feel the need to face that fear, and so I try to actively work on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's, much respect to you, because like I said before, like most people try to avoid those things while you're trying to meet it head on.
Yeah, and so that's basically kind of the philosophy that I try to live by, is to not be scared enough of anything to avoid it. And so I never want to hide from things that I'm afraid of. I want to at least try to figure out how to overcome that, because I don't want to feel like I left anything on the table in terms of experiences or things that I'm passionate about. So I'm not going to let the fact that I get nervous talking stop me from talking about football.
No, that's crazy, because like I said, like that's not the, I guess, not the average mindset that most people would come across. What do you think that's something? I guess that mindset is something that was ingrained with your family, friends, or is that just something you kind of developed on your own with a mixture of all of that?
I think that
because you're extremely articulate, like in all forms. You're making me look bad right now. So I'm just trying to think, what molded that mind to be like that?
I've always believed in what I could do, and I knew that there was always something in me that I felt like I needed to share with others, but I've always, I've struggled with the idea of how do I convey, what I'm thinking or what I believe, and all of that. And I think that I have picked up this mindset is because I feel like I have something important to say. And I think that it would be a disservice to myself and a disservice to people who could benefit from what I have to say if I avoided it. Yeah. And so I think that the motivation comes from believing in what I have to say and thinking that it's important. And so that's true in my work life, that's true in my personal life. And so I think that that's where it comes from.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think that's a perfect segue. I'd like to get to wrapping up to the end of this. What you think you do have something important to say? You think you do have something impactful for this world? Like what are some of those things that you do want to get across? That you think that's so important that you have to to bless the world with, to bless your friends with, your family with?
Well, I think that, I've touched on it before, is this idea of being in touch with what your mental health is. I think that my mindset about thinking about your mental health is important, and I think that that's something that a lot of people can learn from. And so that has been sort of my main focus of my work, is how are you getting in tune with how your mental health is? How are you addressing that? Are you talking about it? Are you doing work on that? And so I think in my work life and in my personal life, I think that that's a big motivator for me, is how do I help people feel comfortable talking about mental health? How do we destigmatize that in daily life? Especially in terms of toxic masculinity. I think that that's something that I'm passionate about, is this idea that you can be masculine as a man, but that also means being sensitive, being, in tune with your own feelings, treating women with respect, treating others with respect, things like that, where, a lot of men feel attacked by this idea of toxic masculinity, but it's really talking about the very worst parts of what people consider to be masculine. Yeah. And so really questioning, is it masculine to be violent towards women? Is it, things like that. And so that's been sort of the focus of my work and my life, is how do we teach both men and women to understand how we respect each other, how you respect yourself, things like that. And then obviously I'm passionate about flag football. Yeah. I was never a fan of the NFL or college football growing up. And the idea of it is honestly a little barbaric to me.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
This idea of a sport where people enjoy others getting hit, especially as we've gotten more information and knowledge about CTE and what, what's grooming young boys to do on, an early age is really fucking people up. And so that's why, that's a big reason why I'm passionate about flag football, and, what I love, what AFFL is doing, is creating a legitimate alternative where, really sort of zeroing in on what's great about football, and it's not the violence. It's not, people destroying their brains for the sport. And so, I'm all about the rise of flag football. I'm hoping that, the NFL, sort of either changes things or honestly becomes extinct at some point in time, because
I ain't mad at you.
It makes no sense to me. And so those are some things that I'm passionate about, and those are important things, I think, that I have to say, that I will continue talking about and figuring out how I get that message across.
I love that, because I rarely hear people say that, but it's one of the topics I've been pushing. Like, not even as a flag football advocate, like I care less, but just as like how much longer are parents going to continue to feed their kids into the system? Like you said, as we grow our knowledge and wisdom on CT or whatever it is, any kind of condition, or just your physical health. Like, how much longer are we is that going to be so prevalent in our culture to keep putting them through the system of high school or Pee Wee football, high school football, college football, pros? And I like asking people, it's like, dude, like, how long do you think the NFL is going to be around? Like, do you see people who have more like experience or had more exposure in like the youth football and like youth pass football? I like asking them, like, dude, like, is there lower enrollment? Is there less involvement? And just trying to see where that goes. Yeah. I mean, that's it's exciting, or it's not exciting, but just like it's a cool thing to see how it turns out.
Yeah, it's great to see sort of that shift happening. I do think the shift is happening. I don't
know. People get upset though.
I don't know how quickly it's going to happen, but I think that there's so much more to football than the hitting,
100%.
All of that, and so never been one to celebrate a big hit or things like that, because we just know so much about people who after they've died, how messed up their brains were.
Yeah.
And to me, that is a horrible price to pay for our sports entertainment.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And I'm someone who grew up same thing, playing football like all my life. I still play every now and then. But at the end of the day, it's like you say, when you do see a big hit, like, I got to understand firsthand, like, what that felt like what the repercussions of that are going to be physically, mentally. So it's just, Bro. Last question.
Yeah.
Wrap it up with this. What have you? It's probably a little redundant to the last question now, thinking about it. But looking back, let's go down 70, 80 years of your life. Looking back, like what kind of changes or what kind of things would you have done in your life to just be able to look back and be like, dude, I was happy with this. Like I had a good run.
I want to feel like I've changed people's lives, and I never thought that was going to be the person that I was going to be. You know, for a long time I thought that work was work. You know, work until you are able to retire. You know, not care about it that much. But now I actually do want to change people's lives. You know, whether it is helping you grow as a person and you know, taking what a negative experience could be in terms of my work and turning it into something that you grow from. And so that's my short answer is I want to feel like I've changed people's lives. And that's not something that I felt earlier in my life, but now I do. And it comes with the burden of taking on that emotional labor, but to me, that's my life purpose.
Awesome. Nailed it.
All right.
Thank you.